Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. Last week we had a really good conversation about bottlenecks in the recruitment process, and this week we're looking at removing potentially one of the biggest bottlenecks a company has by looking at how leaders inspire performance, and that's whether process or passion or both. So here's some stats on leaders and what they do with on leaders, etc. So 61% of overperforming leaders use CRMs to automate part of their sales process versus 46 of underperforming sales leaders who don't. Inclusive organizations report 28% higher revenues, that's times 2 net income, and 30% better economic performance by having a good manager in place. 51% of sales leaders rely on data to measure their sales person's performance, and the top data insight sales leaders use for decision making and forecasting data is their consultants' productive data and their team performance versus quota. High performing companies are twice as likely to offer personalized training to their sales people, and per research conducted by the Brooks Group, 31% of leaders have strong confidence in their sales ability to meet their key objectives this year. However, 23% of sales leaders say that less than 30 minutes of individual coaching in a direct or in a week leads to very little performance. However, 2 hours spent coaching assists reps or salespeople to actually achieve a higher quota. On average, 7 people are involved in the buying decision process. And this is where those leaders who are driving down that organic marketing sales pitch. So 44% of inside sales pipeline comes from marketing. That has produced an average of a 20% downturn on dials. However, 79% of all marketing leads never convert into sales. So it says we still should be massively on the phone talking to people, and how managers are leading that is really important. As much as 60% of sales reps say they're more likely to leave a job if their manager is a poor coach. And more than 2/3 of employees reporting to managers who are not good at coaching are actually considering leaving their jobs. So the way Gartner put it in a Gartner report was, imagine you're the frontline sales manager with 6 to 8 reports, which is the majority of the recruitment market. You spend on average 35% of your day in meetings. Actually, as much the same amount of time you spend reading and responding to the average of 120 emails that you get a day. And nearly 10% of your time is coaching and giving back to the team. Now imagine that learning and development says that you should spend more time developing your people. 30% of your week should be spent developing your people, and that will give you on average a 66% increase in your productivity. So if we start to think about that, we've got to start to think that what do salespeople actually want? 66% of salespeople report that they expect to learn more and develop more with development that occurs outside the classroom, so at desk coaching, while 58% report that they develop new skills by working closely with their colleagues, their peer group, and their managers. So lots of things to think about whether you are an inspiring manager or not, and how we can produce that. This week I'm joined by Paul. Welcome, Paul. Dave is roundabout somewhere, and Heather is looking after her mother, who's unfortunately not very ill at the moment. So she's down there looking there. So Paul, it's down to me and you to sort of kick this week off. So let's look. When you were leading sales teams and businesses, talk to me about how you inspired your workforce.
Oof, what a question. I think the first thing to say is you need to be very visible. I mean, I was very visible in every sense. So this was through constant meetings with, keep in mind, I had, I think, 120 offices around the country at the time, 650 staff. It was a lot of people. So I spent a lot of time on the road. getting into the offices, spending time with the people that were working with me, and trying to keep my ear to the ground in terms of what was going on. The best people to advise me about what the market were doing were the people that worked for me, dealing with their candidates and clients on a daily basis. I had a view, I still have the same view, that we did not manage our staff. In a sense, what I felt particularly strongly about was that we were all about, my management team, we worked for our people. That's how I saw it. It was the other way around. I always felt very strongly that my job and my team's job was to do everything we could to support our people, to help them to find a way to do their job as easily as they possibly could. So, for example, visibly, and I'm not saying this is an inspiring thing, but I always made the point when I went into an office, I went and made the tea, I went and bought the sandwiches, and so forth, because for me it was all about demonstrating that I was there to help them in any which way I could. I do feel it's about communication. Inspiration is a lot to do with communication, and communication comes across a whole range of channels. Obviously, verbal communication, and that's one-to-one as well as within groups, but also clearly in terms of written communication. And I was one for writing weekly newsletters and consistently sending out notes about individuals doing particularly well, and offices doing very well and regions doing well, and so on and so forth. But it was also about, I think, consistency. So consistently talking about what success would look like and felt like, always making sure that the messaging was clear, where we were going, how we were going to get there, getting people to be absolutely bought into the values and the behaviors of the business, and making sure that those values and behaviors and our goals were easy to articulate. I was very proud of the fact that no matter how junior an individual was in our business, any person in our organization could tell you in one sentence what we were about as a business, where we were going and how we were going to get there. So it was almost a daily mantra. And I was the major cheerleader for that. And that was something that I was very consistent with, as were all my people. Just getting that belief that, we could walk through walls, we could conquer anything that was put in front of us. And given an opportunity, if we were one of many recruitment businesses on a PSL, that we would be the dominant supplier because we would deliver outstanding service to our clients. So it was that messaging and making sure that when people did well and that was consistent, I was consistently praising them. And I think really conveying the absolute passion and belief that I had in what we were doing, where we were going, to everybody that worked with us. It's a hard thing to describe, really. I was very visible, so were my management team. Never hid behind walls, always seen, and we were very keen listeners, Howard. It was about listening, not telling, trying to get to what was really going on and being there for our people consistently.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that we have a similar background from that Adecco point of view, where we ran multiple offices, and I think that being seen and visible is really important. And I think where I looked at that when leading sales team, it was, deliver on your promises and do what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it. And I think that's where I sort of first started to look at, KPIs, and rather than looking at key performance indicators, I started to look at myself as a kept promise index. And so it's what promises I made to my staff. Did I keep my promises? Did I deliver those promises? And I found that was, managers knew where they stood and managers understood what I wanted from them. And the other side was you talked about communication, and I think it was that clear communication that I would spend time with the lowest people on the rung, and my view was all the time, if I could make those people rich, then everyone else above them must be richer. And then, so walking into offices, working with people, didn't matter who they were. And I remember certain times where, it's like when you're traveling around the UK, you could be in an office, and you could be working in an office, and you're working late at night, everyone's gone, and one lowly recruiter might be there. Quite often I would turn around and say, ask them what they're doing. They might be resourcing, etc. I said, okay, give me the brief. I'll help you resource, and got stuck in with them. And it was sort of little bits like that where you became human to them rather than being held high up in this ivory
Yeah.
tower
Yeah.
that I thought made the difference. Where we know from
Yeah.
Adecco days, there were certain leaders that were certainly ivory tower builders that their team never saw them, and they didn't get the results they were looking for. And I think that, to me, when you're leading a team and you want to inspire them, you have to be in the trenches with them. You have to be prepared to do what they can do and what they are doing, and and therefore you are listening to everything that's going on and acting on what you are hearing and making sure everyone understands what is required. And I think that, to me, was where we inspired our teams.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think what you've said is very true. You have to exhibit humility. It's not about job titles. We're all in this together, and it's about authenticity. And this point about making even the most junior person feel valued is extremely important, because people, you've said this many times, I've said it many times, if you have great people in your business and they feel valued and bought into what you're trying to achieve, and it's authentic, it isn't just words, you genuinely value people and you exhibit that in a whole range of ways, then you have a great business. It's always been the case. If you have great people and we're all moving in the same direction and people feel genuinely bought into the business and its culture, then you have a great business platform to build upon. And that really is what it's about. But it comes from the leaders to exhibit that level of humility. It's not about job titles. It's not about salaries. As I said, as far as I was concerned, me and my senior sales team, my senior leadership team, beg your pardon, were the juniors in the business. We were there to serve the people that worked for us and with us. That's how I saw it.
So let's look at those comments there. So humility, authenticity, empathy are some of the buzzwords now that are flying around. Sort of, and I read many LinkedIn reports or adverts on these type of things, etc., and posts. So, when you talk about natural leaders, one of the key attributes that the natural leader seems to have is that empathy with their staff and empathy with what's going on. And one of the questions that was posed the other day is, can empathy be taught, or is it a behavioral ingrained set?
Gosh, that's a great question, isn't it? Look, we often talk about the fact that if you're going to be successful in recruitment, and everybody listening here will agree on this point, you do need a high level of emotional intelligence, as they call it, EQ. You can't teach people emotional intelligence. Frankly, you either have it or you haven't got it. I've never yet met anybody out of university that studied emotional intelligence. It's something that's ingrained in you. It's part of your upbringing. It's in your genes, so to speak. And of course, we know that emotional intelligence is to do with having a high level of empathy. It's a natural instinct, as well as being perceptive and sensitive and all the other things, active listening and all the other things that go into that blend of high levels of emotional intelligence. And most people who succeed, if not everybody who succeeds in recruitment, have a high level of emotional intelligence. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of leaders in our industry who have started at a desk and have exhibited success, have risen up the ranks, ultimately to manage a division or a business, there's a reasonable assumption that they already have a high level of emotional intelligence. I've yet to meet, I haven't met many highly successful people who have started out running a desk that haven't had high levels of emotional intelligence. So my assumption is you will already have an ability to show empathy to others. Can you teach people empathy? I think you can make people more self-aware. I think you can coach people to become more self-aware and more aware of other people's feelings and emotions. I think it can be perhaps coached, but it should be, for most people, a natural instinct. And if you have it, and I've always said this, and this is back to your earlier question, as a great leader, you need to be prepared to expose your emotions to your people, not to the extent that you expose the fact you're worrying about things, but you need to be able to express your own vulnerabilities on occasion and show them that you are not unlike them in many respects. And they will in turn be empathetic towards you. Empathy goes two ways. It's about you empathizing with your people and indeed your clients and candidates, but it's also about being prepared to lower your guard so that people empathize with you and are therefore supportive towards you their leader, their manager?
So I agree with absolutely what you say there, but I'm going to challenge a certain
Okay.
part of it. Okay. And the challenge comes in, those people at the top of the leadership spine. And what we tend to see more often than not is that those who are the highest billers tend to get promoted into those leadership positions.
Mm-hmm.
And what we tend to find, some of those highest billers lack a very limited skill set when it comes to empathy, because it's all about them. And it's all about them and their billings. And I think that's where some of that leadership problems happen, is because they don't have that empathetic gene, as you call it. They don't have that empathetic DNA. And yes, can it be taught? I think it can be highlighted, as you said, how you make people feel, but whether they understand their ripple effect when they walk into a room, how they empathize with people, or how they make people worried about that. The boss is in, the boss is in. And I think that's the bit that, natural leaders naturally have people who align to them, where natural salespeople who are really good at sales but lack empathy do not get that alignment, and therefore it makes really hard for them to inspire staff, because they never feel that it's about the staff don't feel that you're in it with them. They feel that you are there because of them. And I think that goes back to that human part of, we all want to be part of the same tribe, but if this person isn't part of your tribe and they're leading it, then there's a very different call.
So Howard, I can't disagree with you, and I think the moral of your story, so to speak, is don't promote narcissists. There are a lot of narcissists in our industry, and they're the people that you've just referred to.
Yeah,
it's all about them, all about me. Now, there is a place for, you could argue, I mean, I could be challenged on this point, there is a place for narcissistic behavior where and that's often the case with big billers. But what you don't do with those people is then give them others to manage, because they won't do that very well, because it's all about them. And we've all witnessed that. I'm sure everybody listening right now can reference people they've worked with in the past, maybe even today, who exhibit narcissistic behavior. Now, if you manage those kind of people, it can be very challenging because, as I said, and you've just said, it's all about them. But what you should never do, but we do see this and we've all witnessed it, is give them the opportunity to manage other people. It doesn't end well. It never ends well. So I see an Andy's comment, I've been called a narcissist. I can't believe it's true. Funny. What you've got to be as a great leader is selfless. It's the complete opposite level of behavior to a narcissist. You've got to be someone that cares a lot about other people. So as this is really just, I think you and I are in violent agreement here.
So let's move this on. Let's move this on, because obviously there's a lot of questions I want to cover, and we're running out of time rapidly as always. I always think, unlike sport, we've got sport, there's rules of engagement. You know how to win and you know how to lose. But in business, there are no really rules of measuring success. Some people go from turnover, some will look at gross profit, etc. But when you're measuring performance in order to create a better performance, what is it that you would measure from a management point of view that would help inspire your workforce?
Okay, so look, I think everybody listening to this will be measuring their performance in similar ways, i.e., KPIs, to use that lovely old expression, metrics and so forth. I mean, there are any number of those, and ratios and so forth. We've talked many times about this. You can only manage what you can monitor. So I'm not going to get into that. I mean, clearly, understanding how you generate high levels of productivity will come down to how you measure the details. The details are all around the standard metrics that we've come to adore over the years. If you're asking me how you measure the success of a business, outside of measuring those metrics, I think it comes down to human engagement. I think it comes down to winning hearts and minds of the people that work with you. I don't like the expression "work for you," work with you. So I think it's about things like staff retention, for example. I absolutely think it's to do with the way in which we engage with our people on a formal level. So things around performance reviews, appraisals, one-on-ones, weekly one-on-one meetings, and taking a genuine interest in the human being that sits in your office, not just their performance in the office, but them as an individual, knowing enough about them to be able to be supportive towards them and look after them, not just at work, but to an extent outside of work. It's all about that level of engagement. And I think it's no great surprise that when you look at the great businesses in our industry, there will be a great deal of the level of retention, people staying in those businesses is very high. For me, this is a very important aspect of how you measure the success of a business. If we only measure businesses in terms of their level of profit, their level of turnover, then I think that's a pretty sad world, don't you think? I think we should be measuring businesses based upon the sentiment of people that work for those companies, how they feel about the organization, how they feel about the behaviors and values, the goals, the vision, the people that they work with, the people they work alongside, their bosses and so forth. Surely it's about human engagement. And by the way, this isn't just internal. Just to make the point that in our industry, your measurement isn't just an internal one. Clearly, you're going to be looking at the retention of your clients and the repeat business you receive from them, your development from a business perspective with them, how you're building business with your clients, and of course, candidate retention, not just placing people once, but helping people throughout their entire careers. And for me, those are the measurements that make a big difference in our industry.
And I think this is what we talked quite a lot about last week, about as a manager getting out of your people's way and letting them perform. And I think that comment there about retention is really important, that, you know, if you retain your staff, and if you go back to the beginning of lockdown, how many people were looking at their staff and removing people or putting people on furlough? Who do they retain? Who do they not retain? But how many people got rid of those narcissistic big billers that maybe were a bit causing trouble, etc., etc. And so to me, that retention to me is the real measure of success of a manager. Because remember, we're talking about how managers inspire. So if your manager is inspiring people, then they will always have a high retention rate of staff. But then what we should be measuring is how many of those staff improve and what's their improvement year on year, whether it be promotion, whether it be sales, etc. So it's not just about retaining the staff and being a nice boss to work for. It's how are you developing your staff as well. And I think that's a very different measure to what we normally measure. You're measuring your manager on the gross profit they turn over, or the net profit, or the EBIT that they're producing, etc., rather than looking at what creates that. And what creates that is the stability of the sales force and the stability of the people working for them. So that is absolutely right. So let's sort of push that then. Let's say, you know, it's easy to lead a team when things are going well. And the true test of an inspirational manager is how they lead a team when things are not going well. So can you give examples of when you've had to sort of really dig deep and turn a team around? And as briefly as you can, Paul, because I know what you like, what did you do?
Oh, gosh. So many instances. I mean, did you guys know I've been in this industry for knocking on 50 years? And as I always joke, horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps and all that stuff. So I think that if I can think of one particular instance, this was after I'd left Office Angels and I went to work for a business that turned out very quickly, evidently, was an insolvent business. So it's a long story. I'll tell anybody this story over a few drinks because it will take hours. But this business was in dire straits when I got there. And I'm afraid that information had been withheld from me during the course of the 6 months discussions I'd been having. But long story short, very quickly, having joined the business, I was in the business of trying to save the company, about 70 jobs, and trying to raise in the order of about £3 million to save the organisation. And it went down to the wire in terms of trying to find an investor. We did. I found an investor. This whole Dragon's Den thing, I remember, was something I went through, but it was real. I had to stand up in front of various investors and try and convince them that we were worth an investment of $3 million. And I managed to do that. During the last week of trying to negotiate a deal with an investment business, I knew very clearly that we couldn't pay anybody, that we owed everybody. And My closest colleagues also knew that there was a very strong chance that we weren't going to save the business and that the company would go under and that we would lose all these people and people wouldn't get paid. And I think most of the business knew that too. And yet not one single person left me during that period, even though I wouldn't have blamed any of them if they had done. And I think that came down to something very important. And I learned more during that period of unbelievable adversity. I didn't sleep for weeks, I promise you that, even though the mess was nothing to do with me. And that came down to communication. I mean, I think that, and I still think about this to this day, that I laughed hardest, and I genuinely, like tears rolling down face laughter, at the gravest moments, because people around me were so bought into, and I don't say this from an arrogant perspective, but so bought into me as a leader and so bought into what we were trying to achieve, that it was almost like, I would imagine, a bit like the sort of blitz mentality. There was so much pressure and so much going wrong that if you hadn't laughed loudly to the point you cried with laughter every day, you couldn't have survived. And I remember those moments with enormous fondness. We got through it, we got the investment, and we saved the business. But I'm very proud to this day of that those weeks, that month or two, because it was, how can I describe it? The level of empathy, to use that word again, towards me, and I'd like to think backwards at them, was something very special. And of all the moments in my career, that's the one I'm proudest of. Saving that business, having that great bunch of people around me, pulling together as an amazing family at that point, and saving the organization. For me, that was the greatest moment in my career. I've had better moments, much more enjoyable moments, but that was something that I'll never forget. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's the thing that comes to my mind.
And I think I've got a similar sort of example where you've got to dig deeper. I remember sort of inheriting an office at Computer People who, on the outside, looked like it was running really, really well, until you got into the inside of the office and started to dig deep. You found that there was a whole host of issues going around that business and going around that office, and they had a huge attrition rate. And I remember having, they had about a sales team of about 6 or 7 and a sales manager. It was interesting when you looked at the sales team, it was a revolving door, and the manager was making loads of money. And when you start to look at it, what was actually happening was the salespeople were doing all the selling, and the manager was taking all the commission and all the credit for it. And the manager had been in the business for an awful long time. And when I removed the manager, I then promised the sales team that I would be with them every step of the way and help them every step of the way. That office went from being one of the lowest performing offices in the UK from an attrition point of view to the best office in the UK, and then became one of the highest performing offices in the UK. And they stayed with me all the way through my duration, and it was only when I left that they actually started to move elsewhere and go elsewhere. And I think that's the bit that you start to think that it's how you look after your people and how you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And that was all about giving them the opportunity to become good at what they were doing and being rewarded for what they were doing, where they were being masked by the other manager and hiding things. And I think it's about, as you've written there, it's about that indomitable spirit, and it is about sitting in the trenches with the people. And we sat in the trenches and we changed things, we moved things around, and we created this sort of little enclave within the office, and it became a very profitable area. And it was interesting then that the perm team started to follow what we were doing, and then the rest of the business started to follow. And that the bit, when you want to create performance, you have to create unity within your team, and everyone has to have an equal footing to move forward. And it is about, I think Guardiola said it the best in one of his documentaries on him. He doesn't go out and recruit the most talented footballer. The first thing he looks for is, will you be part of my team and behavioural set of my team? So he doesn't look for talent. He looks at people who fit
attitude.
in his attitude of his team. Yeah. And I think that's the bit that you're trying to get to, is find the people with the right attitude and then develop them. Otherwise, your deeds. So that really sort of passion, and passion to me comes in many forms. So how do you create passion in your business and put it to good use?
Look, it has to come. It has to be authentic. You can't manufacture passion. You have to feel it. It has to be literally ooze out of every pore of your body. I don't. How can I describe it any other way? You either are, for me, and everybody that knows me knows that I'm one of those people that I'm 100% in or I'm not in. I don't sit on the fence on any issue. So when I'm in, I'm very passionate about stuff, and I know that the people I work with feel exactly the same way. You have to feel it. It has to be. It has to be completely, and I've used the word a few times, authentic, and you have to demonstrate that. And to your points earlier about that is about getting in the trenches, doing whatever it takes to lead by example. But it's also absolutely about having this steadfast belief that we're gonna be okay. We're gonna get there. And it's even to the point that you don't know how necessarily you're going to get there, but you're just going to keep on going. That level of persistence, that level of that sort of stoic attitude. And I said it in that note I just put out there. Humor. You do have to smile a lot, and it's hard, as you said earlier, to smile very broadly in the face of adversity. But you've got to demonstrate that it's going to be fine. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. There's a huge number of examples of all of that. You're going to have to look at Churchill, for example. Whatever you think of him as a politician or as a man, nobody can deny that he had that level of optimism and passion during the war years, still regarded as the UK's, most prominent leader of all time and so forth. You have to demonstrate this passion and belief, and it has to be authentic. I don't think you can manufacture that. It's something that you either have or you haven't. And frankly, if you haven't got it, don't lead.
It's an interesting there. If you haven't got it, don't lead. And I think when you sort of read that Jim Collins, Good to Great, a lot of those leaders, although they weren't the most charismatic people in the world, and that what he classes that, the trophy leader that, look at this guy standing on a pedestal, they were these people that were all about the business and all about the people working for the business. And that passion they had for people, rather than the passion for themselves, created passion and the way they led that passion. And I think when you start to think about that, is, we go back to talking about the terror of management. That R is about rank, and it's about how you make people feel. Do you make them feel as important, more important, or less important? And if you spend most of your time making people feel as important as you or more important than you, then that creates passion, because they believe in what you're doing because you're believing with them. And that's understanding, what their perception of you as a leader is, and whether you are creating that passion. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier when we talked about, how you inspire. To me, that kept promise index was really important to me, keeping that promise to my people that this is what I was going to do, and this is how I was going to do it. This is what I'm going to tell you is going to happen for you if you follow the things that we're going to do. And that creates passion, that people think that you have their best heart and interest. And as you said earlier about hearts and minds, you have their hearts and minds and their best interest. But it's not just about their best interest at work. It was about their best interest overall, inside work, outside of work. And I was the first person to say this to anybody. If you come and you want to leave the business and you're going somewhere that can offer you something better, I will push you out the door. Absolutely. But if I don't think you are, I will happily tell you that. And it was interesting how many people suddenly stayed, how many people talked to me about, I'm thinking of leaving, what can you do? And you gave them the opportunity to do things, and they stayed. And that's because the passion, the belief that you have in people. And you've got to believe in your people that they can deliver. And therefore you have to sometimes get out of their way and allow them to deliver. And they're the best managers. Let them make mistakes, let them make an error, let them do that. But then if it does go wrong, back them, help them clear the mess up. Absolutely. And help them then drive forward. And that's Absolutely. The bit, help them clear the mess up. So if we move forward that and we think about process, because we're trying to put a lot of processes into businesses to help with that, and that helps create the opportunity for the leader to lead in a different way. We constantly hear about repetition being the mother of all learning. And then we hear about doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of madness. So when leading, how important is it to review your leadership process in order to improve not only the efficiency, but the morale of your people?
I mean, this is a really good question. I think, the great businesses consistently innovate. Now, you don't, in our industry, it's very hard to come up with something that is completely different, never been done before. I mean, what tends to happen is we're constantly reviewing what we're doing and improving things by a percentage or a little bit more. It's very hard to just suddenly radically come up with something nobody's ever done before. So it's about constantly reviewing things. We've talked a lot with several of my clients recently about the basics, and I know that lots of people listening here will be doing exactly that, making sure that the repetition that you made reference to around the basics consistently happens, because it's the basics that never change. You must do the basics absolutely perfectly. Keep trying, be an absolute professional around the basics. But in terms of understanding,
Paul, are you talking the basics there, the basics of recruitment or the basics of management?
No, I know you're going to pick me up on that point. So I think I am talking briefly here about the basics of recruitment, but I'm going to come round to saying that in order to ensure, because I know your question is about leadership, while you're doing do you need to change your leadership style? In order to find that out, the answer is you need to be very close to your people. And importantly, talk very tightly, be very tight to your clients, and maybe less so, but importantly, figure out what your candidates are thinking. It's very easy to sit in an office and start to think about, am I managing people well? Am I ensuring that they're doing the right things consistently? And believe you've got the answers. The answers actually sit with your three audiences: your people, your candidates, your clients. And we should be, as leaders, spending most of our time talking to those three audiences to understand whether we're as effective as we've ever been or whether we're becoming less effective, and looking for the areas where we as leaders and indeed our people can become more effective. If we are unable to spend time analysing performance, our own performance and the performance of the business, no one else is going to do it for us. So I think that, your point about that old Einstein cliche is relevant. We work in a very dynamic environment. Things change consistently. Goodness knows, have we ever lived through more volatile times than we live in at the present time? You've got to be considering constantly, daily, is what we're doing effective? Is what I'm doing relative to what's going on around me effective? And the answers actually aren't necessarily in your own head. The answers are all around you. You have to spend the time to consistently analyze and talk to the people that you work alongside, clients, external and internal, to understand the answers, but not be frightened or afraid to make the changes where you deem those fit. And people will tell you if you ask them.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that, when lockdown started, we were talking an awful lot about if you look after your people, they will look after your clients, they will look after your candidates, and they will then obviously close the circle and look after you as in the business owner. And it's interesting when you start to think about that circle, look after your people, they will look after your clients. So to me, when I was making decisions that were going to be either positive or negative on the employee base, it was how that decision was made and then how that decision was delivered, and following up and learning from what happened and what was the fallout. And I think sometimes some of the most positive decisions that we made, we actually put them out in a very poor way, and it didn't have the actual bounce that we expected to have. It didn't have that acceleration that we expected to have. And then sometimes when we were delivering bad news, then we delivered it in a really strong way, and that really helped with efficiency and drive efficiency. And it was all about then the morale of the people. And so I think that communication of what you're doing is important, but then reevaluating and looking at the fallout of what happened, whether it be a positive or a negative fallout, and then reviewing for the next time you deliver that. And sometimes I would make a point of I'd roll something out to my managers and expect my managers to roll it out to their team. Sometimes I'd have a quiet word with, a new starter or someone at the bottom end of the actual sales ladder to find out what they thought and what they understood. And if they didn't understand it and couldn't grasp it, then I go back to my management team and say, we need to readdress how we put this out because people don't understand. And I think that to me was the bit when we start to think about the definition of madness is if we just deliver it and then leave it, then it's either going to be a positive situation or it's going to fester and become very negative. And you've got to start to think about how you address that. And therefore, to me, reviewing my management processes was equally important as reviewing my sales processes to make sure that I wasn't making the same mistakes. And that if I'd made a mistake, I was picking up it early. And back to the call about empathy and humility, that I had the humility to say, I'd made a mistake. We need to change this. We need to do something different. And I think that is the bit on most managers. They make a call and then they stick with it. Yeah. And I was with a client the other day and I was saying to him, how many times do you have a conversation during a review with a consultant and they walk out the door and in your heart of hearts, in your gut, you've got that little feeling going, they didn't understand that. And yet you let them walk away. And then next month when you review them, you go, I knew you were going to do that. I thought that when you walked out the door, but you didn't address it. And I think that's part of that process is to address things that is in your gut feeling. If you know it's wrong, address it and get it right. And if you do make a mistake, go back, address it and get it right. So last question, I think this is going to be an interesting question. What do you think then is the biggest issue recruiters have with management when it comes to inspiring them to perform?
Gosh, I think the answer to that is a lack of understanding. I think you can't manage people in a kind of vanilla fashion. You can't. It's about individuals. It's about understanding individuals, different human beings. I talked earlier about metrics and KPIs and basics. And I mean, there's a place for all of those things, and every business in our industry needs them because you have to measure them. But in the end, it's all about people, and you need to be capable as a leader of really getting close to your people, understand them as a person, as a human being, and inspire them differently. I think there are obviously, and we all do it, generic messages we send out, general messages we send out to the business, all of which I'm hopeful are very valid. But if you really want to be able to inspire people, and it's a plural, isn't it? If you want to inspire individuals, then you need to get tight to those people. You need to know who they are, what their drivers are, what's going on in their lives, what they want, what does success look like for them, and so on and so on and so on. And when you fail to do that, if you fail to acknowledge them, if you fail to value them and make them aware that you value them in every sense, then you've lost them. And when you've lost them, their hearts and minds, their sentiments, then they're working for your salary. They're not working for your business. They're not working for the goals and the vision. And having people working purely for the paycheck is not where you want to be. So it does come down to inspiring people from the perspective of them as a human being and then as a person, and understanding what makes them tick. When we don't do that, we lose them and we fail to inspire them.
It's interesting. I think this is all about management and how you manage the people and how you almost become subservient to the people if you're a good manager in the right way, although you still have the authority to lead and drive. Yeah. And to me, what recruiters have the bigger problem is they are promised the earth and delivered very little in most occasions. And it's, what are you delivering? Why are you delivering it to the people? And I think once you start to deliver things properly to the people, then they start to trust you. And once trust starts to really become an engagement product, then it starts to inspire them. Because if you say that's going to happen, then they trust it's going to happen. And, I speak to a lot of recruiters, and they say, oh, I was promised this, but it never happened. I was promised this, it never happened. And I always say, well, what did you promise that you delivered? And I think that promise both ways is the biggest issue that, managers have with recruiters and with what recruiters have with managers. So I think managers need to look at what they are delivering and how they're going to deliver it to their team. And then recruiters have to look at what they're delivering back to the management and where it is. So you can't deliver everything all the time, but if you're forever dropping in, one of the big ones is training, ad hoc training, at desk training. How often does a manager say to a recruiter, yes, I'm going to help you on that training. Let's do that today at 2:00. And at 2:00 comes, they go, oh, I can't do that now because I am absolutely snowed under with my client. So my client is more important than you. And that goes back to how you make people feel. And I think that's the biggest issue that recruiters have, that managers promise too much and under-deliver on those promises. So I think from a management point of view, when we look about this, to us, it's all about the hearts and minds of the people, and then how you deliver to bring those people forward and get those people to perform to their maximum capabilities and beyond. And to do that, the team have to trust you, and you have to trust them.
Yeah, great. Well said.
Anything else you want to add, Paul, to today's?
I've enjoyed. I mean, I think it's a great subject. We could spend a lot longer on this subject, as you're well aware. I think everybody would agree with that. The one thing I'd say is that there is never a point, I think, where you can genuinely say, even with my length of experience, that you've really been able to, you are that complete manager, that complete leader. It is a case, I think, for everybody that manages other people, that cares and takes care of other people, to be constantly learning, to be self-aware, to be, as you said earlier, how do you consistently improve, to be self-critical. Because I think the moment you think you've got it, you're a great leader, is when it all goes wrong. You've got to be consistently on it. It's a profession, being a leader, being a manager, and it requires a huge amount of commitment. And as I said, and I think if my mindset is always, I did well in certain situations, but I always feel, without ever changing my view, that I could do better. There's always that sense that when things go well, there were things that could be improved. And as we said earlier, when it's not going great, then you really got to step up and show great leadership qualities. So this is a subject we could talk about for a very long time, but
those type of things, and all of those things to me are what a leader does. But if you become that dictatorial type of leader, then you never create that trust and balance within the team that people are looking for. So that's it for this week. I'm going to leave it there. Next week, we go on to the final part of this series in this 4-week series of webinars. And next week is going to be a really interesting one, because we've talked a lot about bottlenecks. We've talked about leadership, etc. Next week, we're going to talk about, are certain consultants undermining your processes? Do you know you're getting sabotaged? So we're going to start to go back to where we started at lockdown, but we're going to now start to look as the market starts to move forward. Do you have consultants in your business that are sabotaging your business? And do you know that they're doing it from there? So Ladies and gents, thanks very much for attending. Much appreciated. Paul, thanks for your input as always.
Pleasure.
Much appreciated.
And
ladies and gents, enjoy the rest of the week. Hopefully we'll get a bit more sunshine. It won't rain all week, but we do need the rain for the garden. My garden's looking very brown at the moment. I like the snow because then it makes my garden look like everybody else's, but at least it's healthy. Ladies and gents,
everybody.
thanks very much. See you all next week.
Bye, everybody. All the best.